Namaskar and good morning and welcome everyone. I am Abhinav Agarwal, your host for today's Indica book session. This is the third Q&A we are hosting in 2022, and it gives me great pleasure to have a very distinguished author as well as a fascinating book to discuss. The book is Ancient Hindu Science: Its Impact on the Ancient and Modern Worlds. It's been written by Professor Alok Kumar and published by Jaiko Books. I'll read out a couple of lines from the back of the book, and then I'll read out an introduction to Professor Alok himself, and then we'll get into the actual Q&A. So, uh, from the back of the book, it says, to understand modern science as a coherent story, it is essential to recognize the accomplishments of the ancient Hindus. They invented our base 10 number system and zero that are now used globally, carefully mapped the sky and assigned motion to the earth in their astronomy, developed a sophisticated system of medicine with its mind-body approach known as Ayurveda, mastered metallurgical methods of extraction and purification of metals, including the so-called Damascus blade and the iron pillar of New Delhi, and developed the science of self-improvement that is popularly known as yoga. Ancient Hindu science is well documented, that is, the book is well documented with remarkable objectivity, proper citations, and I think this is one of the most important critical things that really struck me is that it is meticulously cited, it has got copious references, so anyone wants to check up on any of the assertions made in the book, they can go and look at those references, and a substantial bibliography. The book itself is written in a very easy to read style. It is not overly, technical or full of scientific jargon that might be off-putting. The references provided, I think, serve as a wonderful source for anyone who wants to go in and, read up more about this. As for the author, Professor Alok Kumar is a distinguished teaching professor of physics at the State University of New York at Oswego. He was born and educated in India, and he has been teaching in the American higher education for about 4 decades. He is a fellow of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Germany, and a NOVA NASA fellow. He is active in the fields of atomic physics, chemical physics, history of science, and science education. And with that, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Alok Kumar to this third Indica Books Q&A session.
Namaste, Abhinavji. Thank you so much for inviting me to this conversation. That will allow me to interact with you and with all your listeners.
Thank you, Alok ji. So before we begin, this Q&A is being live streamed on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. You can go ahead and post in your comments on YouTube and Facebook, and they will show up here so that Professor Alok can answer them towards the end of this Q&A, or if it turns out that the question is very, very pertinent, we'll leave it to him to answer that. Once the Q&A is over, we will be putting up this video also on our Indica Books Indica Books channel, which contains more than 50 such author interactions. So you can follow us on Twitter at Indica Books. You can go to Facebook and join our group at facebook.com/groups/Indic Book Club. So Alok ji, let me begin by this very interesting point you made right at the very beginning of the book itself, which is that there was some resistance when you first came up with the idea of this book and the title of this book, Ancient Hindu Science. You were told by some that do not use Hindu, use Indian instead. That will make it more acceptable. Why?
I do not know the reason, but that's what they told. And I wanted my book to be based on truth, because whatever I'm writing, my boundary line was before 5th century. So I covered the literature of India prior to 5th century, and at that time the word name India did not even exist. So I thought, it would be improper, and so I ignored those suggestions, and I paid a big price because I was dealing with some very prestigious publishers. I mean, globally ranked publishers, and not one, but more than one. And they all told me the same thing. And I thought, well, you know, if they can publish a book on Islamic science, why can't they publish a book on Hindu science? And Vedas, Upanishads, these are the books of the Hindus, and in my book, I'm focused on these books. So I thought it's fair to do that, or to stick to my guns, at that on this issue.
This is very interesting. So, and you make a very pertinent point that there are books published by mainstream publishers, reputed publishers, under the title of Islamic science and so on. But it seems that these same publishers stuck to their guns and refused to go ahead, refused to greenlight a book that had the words ancient Hindu science, even though you came from a very impeccable academic background yourself, and you were willing to provide all verifiable references and primary sources to back all of your assertions, and yet those same publishers would not budge.
That is true. And the thing that I felt was quite unfortunate. One of the reviewers wrote that if you will publish this book, the right wing people in India will grab this. So, for political reasons, you should discard this book, And I couldn't even believe it that first, this was prior to Modi, because I wrote this book before Modi even came in, national politics. And second thing is, I have no involvement in politics, and there is nothing in this book where I am trying to, make a political statement. It's a book based on facts, and if as a human being we cannot even face facts, there is something wrong. So I thought, okay, I must stick to this. Let's see what happens. And I must say that I'm very happy that I made that sacrifice, because there was no sacrifice actually. I'm quite pleased that it happened that way.
Very interesting. Very interesting. It fits a pattern that we have been observing for the past several years. This attempt at suppression of anything that is considered Hindu, sort of denialism that is taking place. But coming to the book, uh, let me ask you a question. Uh, who is this book aimed at? Because when one starts to write a book, one has a particular audience, a demographic in mind. And looking at specifically Indians, for example, since Jaico is a very well reputed Indian publisher, they have brought this book out. Why should an Indian read this book, or for that matter, why should a Westerner read this book?
Yeah, let me first explain why I wrote the book. And the reason was I made a promise to my parents because they did not want me to leave India. And so they said, you must stay in India. And I said, no, I want to go to America. So I made a commitment that I will write this book because they wanted me to do something for the country and for religion. I said, I will do both. So that was the reason why I wrote this book. But when I was writing, I realized, that cultures, religions, nations, they are quite fragile. They evolve and then they die. those who die, what happens is if one generation is not preserving that knowledge and passing it to the next generation, that knowledge will disappear. So every generation must get involved in documenting the knowledge of the or compile the knowledge of the previous generations, improve it, and pass it to the next generation. And that's one thing that I have tried to do. And for that reason, I wrote this book. And this statement may seem abstract to some, but let me explain it in a slightly different context. We all love our parents and our mother, and we love her food that she prepares for us. But how many of us learned those recipes? Not many. And once she is gone, then we miss her and we miss those recipes. This is what happens if you don't preserve the information. Same thing happens, with the cultures or with nations. So it is extremely important to preserve this information. Now, what an Indian can get from this book, they can learn about their own heritage. Now, some people may object to that. That why is so important to know the heritage? I want them to think about what will happen to them as a person if they keep their intellect but lose their memory. Can they function
Uh,
in a
what what do you mean by that? If they lose their memory, but yeah, that sounds very fascinating.
see you keep your analytical skills, but you do not remember what happened yesterday or what happened weeks ago. So if you lose your memory, you cannot function as a human being in everyday life. You have to know, oh, he is my father, she is my mother, so that you can trust them and you can interact with them. Same thing
I
is
see.
true with a culture. In a culture, you have to define history and know that history so that as a culture, you can make decisions. Otherwise, you'll keep repeating the same mistakes again and again. And that's not very smart. So, Indians, they will learn about their heritage and a heritage which they can feel proud of, because what Hindus has contributed is so immense, it is so much. Unfortunately, we have not properly documented it. So that's what Indians can get. Now, I
Right.
assume you ask what Westerner can get, right?
Correct. Correct. That
Okay.
also.
Okay. What happened to the, just one second. What happened, in the Middle East, the golden age of Islam? Why it happened? We do not know. We don't talk about it. Why the European Renaissance happened at that time? We do not know. But once you add Hindu science to the story, then it is very easy to understand why the golden age of Islam came, or why the European Renaissance happened. The mathematical revolution that happened in India was the cause of the scientific revolution that happened in Europe, or was the cause of the golden age of Islam. That's a story that has never been, that's not much shared. in academia as yet.
So, Alokji, here's a question. In your book, you specifically say that you stop at Aryabhatta the first, sometime around the 5th century. Uh, can you walk our viewers very, quickly through through that entire journey from ancient, from the very beginnings, the origins of the number system, zero, the decimal placeholder system. I think you refer to the Bhakshali manuscript that has got hundreds of references to, zero. You even talk about the binary number system and say that it is generally credited to Leibniz sometime in the 16th or 17th century, but almost 1,000 years before that, or even more, for going further back, Hindu texts had referred to the binary number system, to the roots of algebra. And because you stopped at the 5th century or so, you have not included the origins or the development of calculus that essentially went to the west, and then resulted in Newton coming up with his development of calculus a few hundred years later. Can you walk our viewers through that timeline?
Let me first talk about the nature of historiography, means where we assign dates to these manuscripts. I mean, we all know that Vedas are the ancient books of the Hindus. Then comes Upanishads, then come Puranas, and in between came like Vaishishika Sutra, Aryabhatiya, and so on. That is well known. And we also know the sequence, like first Vedas, then Upanishads, and then Puranas. However, when were they written? Uh, that knowledge, we know it only in some cases. And let me explain why. Because the Indian culture or the Hindu culture was an oral culture where documents were memorized and not written on a clay tablet or on papyrus like in Egypt, clay tablet in Babylon. So, because it was a oral culture, because of that, there is no documentation, and if there is no documentation that people can look at, or that can create a archaeological artifacts, that people can assign a date to, it becomes very, very difficult to assign a date to these manuscripts. Now, because of that, there is a lot of controversy in about the Hindu manuscripts, because Max Muller was the first person who defined 1200 BC for Vedas.
Correct.
And as you may know about Max Muller, his intention was to Christianize India. That's what he wanted to do, achieve, And there is no, dispute about that. In fact, not only him, practically most of the British scholars who studied India, like Monier Williams, William Jones, and all these people, that was their goal. That's what they wanted to achieve. Max Muller never came to India, never visited India even for a day, and became a leading expert on Hinduism. And he
And it
assigned
is
a date 1200 BC without any, supporting facts.
and
And
it is
that
said that Max Muller, his entire chronology was based on the supposed start of the world itself in 4004 BC, and he worked his way forward from that, making assumptions that obviously Mankind would have appeared first in Europe. Civilization would have appeared first in Europe. Then those people would have, started exploring and invading other lands, and obviously they would have come to India and so on. And the funny thing is, more than 100 years after that, there are academics who still stick with that date. They don't admit it, but they are absolutely so reluctant. They don't want to admit the possibility of Indian civilization predating Western civilization, essentially.
That is true, and that 1200 BC that Max Muller assigned, it is very difficult to change it because all these scholars with the colonial mindset, they want to protect it, and so there are lots of mistakes that have been made in India. Only after Emperor Ashoka came, we started building monuments, and we started recording things on pillars. But before that, we never did that. So after Ashoka, means we are talking about 3rd century BC, it is very easy to define. And so, for example, in Aryabhatiya, we know uh, it was written in 5th century AD. So quite a few manuscripts we can define, but others, like the place value system or the number system or the binary number system, we simply cannot assign a date that by and large most scholars will agree. So I think we need I mean, just to think about it, it came to my mind. Aryabhatta wrote Aryabhatiya when he was in his early 20s. So that's the age, you are so young. And he wrote in that book, the purpose of writing that book. He said, because this is the ancient knowledge of India and dying, to revive that knowledge, I am writing this book. So everything in India, you know, uh, that Aryabhatta wrote was an ancient knowledge. I mean, it says in his book clearly. Unfortunately, Indians, in India, Hindus have not attracted the best brains to analyze these things. So we need influx of people. I hope some of the listeners decide to dedicate their career to such investigations. There is a lot to be done. We have millions of manuscripts written in Sanskrit language. Nobody has translated them into English. Millions. So we need scholars who are good in Sanskrit and good in English, and let them translate those manuscripts so that the whole world can learn what we are about, what we have, even like, Chanakya, Chanakya book, uh, we know it only from the last 150 years. So we need scholars to investigate those things, find those books, and share it with the whole world. I lost your voice.
Oh, I didn't realize I was on mute. I was saying that this is when Professor Shama Shastri discovered a manuscript of the Arthashastra, and then he translated it. That is how the world came to know of the full Arthashastra, Chanakya's, Kautilya's Arthashastra. I
That is
wanted
true.
to read out from your book. This is chapter 3, section 9, trigonometry. And I found this fascinating that you write that the sine function was called Jya by Aryabhatta. Al-Khwarizmi, when when he borrowed this concept, chose an Arabic term that is similar in pronunciation, and he used jibe for this term. This word has a specific meaning, fold or pocket. And this is where it gets interesting. The Latin word for pocket, you write, or fold, is sinus. And thus the term sine for this trigonometric function evolved. And yet we are told that trigonometry originated in Greece, in ancient Greek, and that is how India and Indians and everyone else learned trigonometry. But this is a clear case of transmission of trigonometric knowledge from the East back to the West.
Yes. In fact, it's interesting. I just published a research article, and while I was working on that article, I decided to investigate this question. That the knowledge that you have just shared, how many trigonometry book will cover this knowledge? The answer is almost close to zero. However, this knowledge is so prevalent that you pick up any dictionary or encyclopedia, it is there. So it is not in the textbook, means we are not teaching it to young children, but we are listing it in dictionaries. You pick up Random House dictionary or pick up, Oxford dictionary, it will say, go under the, etymology of sign, and it will say it's, it is in Sanskrit. So this is the, a problem. They wanted to, or when I'm saying they means European, they wanted to colonize India. So they produced massive literature that was not truthful. The most interesting thing is there is no dispute about it. In fact, Needham, a scholar from Cambridge, he openly raised this issue and said that this is a cardinal sin to do that. So they did it, and they never admitted it. And but now they admit it, but it's very difficult to change it. I can give
So,
you multiple examples. Like, why do we call 0, 0? So the story is the person Al-Khwarizmi who introduced, the sine function to Europe, because his book became very popular in Europe. In India, 0 is called shunya. When Al-Khwarizmi, he wrote his book, he used the term, Arabic term for nothing, and that is sifr. Sifr means nothing. That sifr, when European learned it, became cipher. So 0 in Latin language is cipher. Then when Italian decided to use that, they decided to spell it with Z and not with C. So eventually it transformed into 0. So that knowledge again, it is available to most people, but it is not taught in textbook. Now, just think about it, and I hope I'm not deviating with your question. That if you ask, or tell a child in elementary school in the Western world that okay, these knowledge came from India or came from the Middle East, the child is going to ask, "What is India?" Suddenly, you have a reason to humanize that child and teach him about the globe. And we are missing all that wonderful opportunity by still sticking to the Eurocentric literature. And that
so
Eurocentric literature is not only in Europe, but in the whole world.
Very true, Alokji. One thing that I've noticed is that in recent times, when it has become obvious that, let's take calculus for example, that calculus originated in India. One thing that some Western academics have started to do is earlier they used to say that algebra and calculus originated with Newton, and that's where the origins of calculus are. Then when evidence turned out that actually a few hundred years before, in Kerala, you had developments that were critical to the subsequent development of calculus. They said, yeah, but it's not proven. Now that it has been proven, I have noticed a lot of Western academics tend to say that, oh yes, but it is not exclusive to India. Whatever was happening in India was also happening elsewhere in the world. So yes, India did contribute to the growth of calculus, but it was just one of several civilizations where this work was happening. How accurate or fair is this characterization?
Uh, it is fair. I mean, people all over the world, they were, we pursue science and technology because it brings us prosperity. And that's the reason people all over the world, they practice science and technology because they want to become prosperous. It brings materialistic possessions. However, you know, it doesn't mean that all cultures or all nations contributed equally. So there is no problem in accepting that Egyptians or Greeks, they did something. Yes, but include Indian knowledge also or Hindu knowledge also, and then see where they all stand with respect to each other. We have not done that. So the knowledge that we are sharing today is highly incomplete, and the good thing is, and I strongly believe in that within perhaps our lifetime, it will change because there is a massive revolution going on. In China, the Chinese government has poured billions of dollars to revise history. In the Middle East, uh, you know, uh, Islamic countries have poured a very large sum of money to revise history. Indians have not done it, as yet, but massive literature is being produced, and my feeling is, uh, within our lifetime, perhaps we will be teaching a different history of science.
One hopes that comes true sooner sooner than later. Uh, One question that I had is, in the area of metallurgy, for example, the ability to create swords that wouldn't shatter or break. Across the world, it is known as Damascus steel, but that is not, again, not the complete picture, right? The
Yeah,
science of metallurgy, we all know about the Ashoka pillar that hasn't rusted for almost 2,500 years despite being made of iron. But the story of Damascus steel is unfortunately not that well known.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. It's like the story of Arabic numerals. We call it Arabic numerals, but when you go to Arabia, they don't call it Arabic numerals. They call it Hindu numerals. The same way, Damascus steel is called Damascus steel in rest of the world except for Damascus. There they call it, in the Middle East, the terms are like Falade Hind, means steel that is coming from India, or Muhannad, which is again, I'm since my knowledge of Arabic is not very good, I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, but again, it says that coming from India. Uh, in uh, Islamic literature, when you go through the Islamic literature, they say that the best swords are coming from India. In again and again, so it's it's a distortion of history, and practically all books these days today, they accept that Damascus steel actually came from India. To give an idea how ancient steel making is in India, when Alexander the Great he captured Porus and then released him. Porus was very grateful to Alexander the Great. So he wanted to give him lots of wealth. And he gave him, I think, close to 6,000 pounds of steel to Alexander because it was something that Alexander could never have because they did not know how to produce steel. Now, this is we are talking of BC period. Now let me talk the recent period. Michael Faraday, a very famous British scientist, decided that he is going to make steel in England. And he tried to make steel, uh, Damascus steel in England, and he failed. All those research papers are available for anybody to read that he failed, which we are talking about 250 years ago. So that knowledge, which was ancient in India, was so precious that Europeans could not do it just 250 years ago. So
Fascinating.
yeah, there are so many things like that. Unfortunately, the sad part is even Indians, we do not know about our own heritage.
So one of the things that you mentioned, Alokji, is that the Arabs themselves always use the term, Hind when referring to Hindu numerals, to the decimal placeholder system, to zero, and to algebra and everything. But you say you have not been able to find when did this Hindu Arabic numerals phrase started to be used, where this hyphenation with the Arabia started to happen. Possibly, one thing that you mention is that this coincided with the rise of colonialism, but there is no definitive point in history when one can go back and say that after this time the use of Hindu Arabic started to rise.
Oh, we know about that. In fact, the books that were written in Europe in 11th and 12th century, nobody wrote Arabic numeral. They were all using Hindu numerals in Europe. So it is only after 14th century when Europe decided to colonize India. By the way, they came to India to colonize much later, but they planned for it few hundred years before that. I can even tell you Pope Clement. He asked Roger Bacon, that's the name of a scientist, to compile a history, so that he can learn how to colonize. So Roger Bacon wrote a book called Opus Majus. It's a very popular book, and it should be available on the internet free. You don't even have to buy. Uh, it's written in 12th century, 12th or 13th century, somewhere at that time. It writes about, in a glorifying language, it talks about India, that how great, and it says clearly that India is better than Europe. But that knowledge disappeared once they decided to colonize. Then Indians became barbaric to them. And they had to be civilized, like Rudyard Kipling when he wrote that White Man's Burden.
Right. And Roger Bacon, that you just mentioned, you write on your book, and this is on page 57. He was in the 13th century. He was a
Yeah.
noted Franciscan natural philosopher from England, and he studied at the Oxford University and the University of Paris. One thing that you also write about is this diffusion of Hindu science. And what I found fascinating is how it moved to even China, where one Indian philosopher, he moved and he, not only did Chinese philosophers who came to India would return back to China after spending 10, 15, 20 years or more, carrying back with them hundreds of manuscripts, copies of manuscripts that they acquired from the libraries and places of learning like Nalanda and Takshashila and so on. But Indian philosophers also went, Hindu philosophers also went to China.
Yes. I want to share first, you know, China as an example of the power of India. China became a Buddhist country, and not one human being was slaughtered in China. Means they were not forced to convert. They converted from their own choice. This is that shows the power of India. The power of Hindus. Now, talking of the migration of knowledge to to China, uh, Chinese top scholars are Huan Sang. I do not know how you pronounce it. Fayan, I Sing, and a few others. They were all travelers who came to India, studied in India, went back to China with thousands of manuscripts, and then became famous in China. So now in the Tang Dynasty, astrology was practiced. The state astrologers were mostly Hindus. This is a knowledge, we know it now, it's well accepted. And we even know the names of those people who their job was to tell the king what to do and what not to do, because astronomy and astrology were merged together. So these astronomers, and by the way, this is not only true in India, even Newton was practicing astronomy as well as astrology, and so was Kepler. But, you know, that's not what we share in science. So most of these astronomers in Tang Dynasty, they were all Indians, and we know their names, and their names are listed in my book. And I don't want to pronounce because I have a feeling I will be mispronouncing their names. Uh, but that is true. So the knowledge migrated in the direction of China, and in the direction of the Middle East, and from there to Europe. I mean, I have translated a manuscript written in Spain in the 11th century, saying that science started from India. I mean, this is European knowledge. And it's not an ordinary book. It's one of the most popular book during 11th century, saying that science started from India, and then from there it went elsewhere. I mean, I don't want to claim that we are number one, but definitely that tells us that we are a leader. We were a leader in science and technology. And
So,
by the they don't use the term India. They use the term Hindu. That Hindus are they originated science and technology.
So, Alokji, as we come to the close of our Q&A session, there's one question that I've been meaning to ask you. Now, see, I can understand in some ways that as colonialism spread, it was important to show the colonized people like Indians and tell them that you had nothing to contribute and you were always inferior, and therefore being colonized, being invaded has always been part of your history. So I can understand that narrative that the colonials had to build. But we have now been independent for, we will be celebrating 75 years of independence. And yet, if I look at the history curriculum, if I look at the science curriculum in India, irrespective of the government, irrespective of the political party ideology that has been in power, they have preserved and continued the colonial form of education and history. Now, this cannot be by accident, right?
Well, first thing is people who decided policies in India, they were all trained in Oxford and Cambridge, and that's all they knew. So their knowledge base was colonial knowledge base, and that's what they propagated, and that's what's happening in India. I must say that recently things are changing, and my feeling is because of the global push that is happening elsewhere also, within our lifetime, within our generation, this will change. I'm quite hopeful, that it will change. And that's the reason I write these books, because it's not to push, my heritage, but is to speak the truth. This is the truth. And if somebody can find mistake in my book, I'll change it. It's but we must know the truth, because truth is beneficial. Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So we have to practice that, and for that, we have to share the truth. And I hope the youth of India, you know, get motivated to investigate their own heritage.
So do I. So do I. I hope your book makes a contribution in helping change that narrative. So, folks, we have been talking with Professor Alok Kumar for the last 50 minutes. And we have been talking about his book, Ancient Hindu Science, Its Impact on the Ancient and Modern Worlds. It has been published by Jaiko Books. It is available online. You can buy it at bookstores. And this book is a short. It's less than 200 pages long. It's got several pages of a bibliography, so you can go and you can check up any reference that is cited there. Professor Alok Kumar includes a timeline of Hindu manuscripts from starting right from the Vedas to the Upanishads to the Sutras, the Sushrut Samhita, the Charak Samhita, the Manu Samhita, the Purans, the Pingalas, Chanda Sutras, the Brahmanas, the Bhakshali manuscript to the Aryabhatiya. So, since you stopped at the 5th century, I have to ask you this question. Do you have plans on covering the period after the 5th century?
Yes, let me share. When I wrote my book till 5th century, the book that you are seeing, the original length of that book was about 700 pages. And the publisher looked at it and said, there is no way we are going to publish it. It's too big. So you have to cut it. So I had to cut it. They said, write a book in about 150 pages. And so I said, okay, but I could not write anything in 150 pages, so it became 220, close to. So I have a lot more material, that can be added, which I could not add in this book. And then anything that happened after the 5th century, I have not written that, and I plan to write those things also. So uh, definitely there will be more books coming down the line.
Thank you so much, Professor. We look forward to subsequent editions and subsequent additions to this book. The book Ancient Hindu Science is, I think, a wonderful addition to the corpus of books that seek to bring out not only unknown facts and truths about ancient Indian and Hindu contributions, but also add to the corpus that helps in decolonize bit by bit the Indian mind today. There is there's a very nice comment by Sri Gajendra Singh, founding VC Doon University. Excellent dialogue in ancient Hindu science. I hope this book becomes available in libraries throughout Bharat and India. And I can only, second these wonderful words. And I hope this book is read by more and more people. We This video will be available on YouTube, and I encourage people to buy this book, read it, review it, share it with other people. You can go to Amazon, Goodreads, and other places and leave a short review, because those reviews do help other people make up their minds when looking for books to buy. Any closing words, Alokji?
Uh, I hope we have, some young people in the audience here, and I appeal to them that, they should pursue these kind of studies because the country needs it, the humanity needs it, and it will be just see the soft power of India, what India has done to the world. uh, Yoga, that's Indian contribution. I can count a very large number of Ayurveda. That's an Indian contribution. These are all, some very innovative ideas that evolved from India. And I think by studying our heritage, these ideas are going to evolve, and it will be good for not only for India but for humanity. Because we have always believed in that the whole world is our family. So I strongly encourage people to uh, study our heritage.
On those very encouraging and positive and hopeful words, we'll take leave. Thank you, Alokji, for coming on board this Indica Books Q&A.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and it was a pleasure, and it got me a chance to share my ideas with you and with your listeners. It's such a
Thank you
pleasure.
so
I'm
much.
honored.